Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sophia Said. I am one of the board of directors of Central Arkansas Library System, and I am very honored to be here with these two amazing women. So we're excited you're here, but we are also excited that you all are here to listen about this very, very important topic. So before we start, on behalf of the library and the Arkansas Literary Fest, I want to thank you all. I want to thank you, the Rebsamen Fund, who is the sponsor of today's panel, because that's what makes this wonderful panel possible. And a few housekeeping items. If you would please shut down or silence your phones. And we stop at sharp 2 o'clock. But if you have to leave before 2, that's absolutely fine. Just leave quietly because this program is being recorded. And we hope you all have fun today with them. So, now to the main event with you ladies. Police brutality trials, white supremacy rallies, Black Lives Matter marches, Islamophobia, religious persecution, interfaith intolerance, immigration ban. Race and religion is the story behind most of the stories that you all hear nowadays. Yet it's difficult to talk about it. I think this panel could not happen at a more important time than today. So we move on to the fact that why is it difficult to talk about race and religion when it's such a big part of our life, which brings us to our first book. So you want to talk about race by Ijeoma Oluo. How do we talk about race? How do we talk about those issues and unanswered questions which sometimes end in hurt feelings, damaged relationships, even violence? So this book is designed to facilitate positive and informed dialogue by Ijeoma Oluo. According to Harper's Bazaar, it's one of the 10 best books to read in 2018. So make sure you get your copy on your way out and get it signed by Ijeoma before you leave today. Ijeoma is a Seattle-based author, writer, speaker, and internet yeller. She is the author of this book, but also editor of The Establishment. Her writings on race, feminism, and other social issues have been featured in The Guardian, The Stranger, The Washington Post, Time Magazine, and many other places. She is also mother of 2 boys. So Ijeoma, welcome to our panel, and please read for us.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to read the beginning of chapter 2 of my book, titled, What is Racism? It was an argument with a coworker that started where many arguments with coworkers start nowadays, on the internet. This coworker had posted a meme about how poor people should be given drug tests if they wanted to get welfare benefits. You know the kind of post I'm talking about, the one that sends a message like, if I need a drug test to get a hardworking job, you should have one to get the free stuff my hardworking tax dollars are paying for. I've seen these memes countless times, and they are never anything less than a gut punch to me. I pointed out that as someone who had grown up on welfare and was subjected to this attitude her entire childhood, this sort of stigmatization really hurts poor people who are just trying to survive. Poor people shouldn't have to prove how much they deserve to have a roof over their heads and feed their children. There are a few ways to react when somebody tells you that your language is unintentionally hurting them. And while I was hoping for a quick apology or maybe just a quick correction, my coworker decided to double down on her claims and add that she thought a lot of poor people should also be sterilized because a lot of women take advantage of the system by having more kids to get more money. Suddenly, it was like I was on a TV talk show circa 1984 talking about welfare queens. I honestly didn't think that people really believed that myth anymore, a myth that was used to dehumanize a generation of welfare recipients. And as someone who wouldn't have existed had there been forced sterilization of poor people, I took offense to this comment. In addition, as someone aware of our country's racist history of forced sterilization of women of color, I knew how dangerous statements like these can be. This discussion became heated quite quickly as my coworker tried to both state that she had not intended to offend me or my brother, who also worked at the same company and was witnessing this argument online. But maybe I needed to be less angry, because this was why people like me got a bad reputation. Note, people like you is a good warning that a conversation is about to head into pretty racist territory. Shit got pretty intense. Black on black crime was even brought up, I believe. And an entire evening was dedicated to an emotionally draining and ultimately fruitless conversation. The next day, I was talking to a friend about the incident. I was still very upset about what had happened the night before. Believe it or not, I, like most people, really do just want to live in peace and not have 4-hour-long arguments about race and poverty on the internet. And it is always a bit of a gut punch to realize that someone you have been sitting next to for months or even years secretly harbors views that deny your basic humanity as a black woman. No matter how many times it happens, I have yet to get used to it. It's really difficult to realize that you've been sitting next to someone capable of racism like that, I explained over coffee. Whoa, 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 Ijeoma, my friend interrupted, literally putting a hand up to stop me from speaking further. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Excuse me? I asked, stunned and confused. You can't just go around calling anything racist. Save that word for the big stuff, for Nazis and cross-burnings and lynchings. You're just going to turn people off if you use such inflammatory language. I really, really wanted this to just be a matter of misunderstanding. I really wanted this to be a case where perhaps he just didn't know how harmful everyday racism is, and once he did, he would change his mind. I tried to explain the real danger of unchecked racism and microaggressions to people of color, but he wasn't going to hear it. There was a real racism, as he defined it, which was a post-Reconstruction era horror type of racism, and there was whatever I was talking about, which he wasn't comfortable categorizing, but he was pretty sure wasn't that big of a deal. The day-to-day reminders that I am less than, that I should just learn to get over or find a more pleasant way to confront. He went on to discuss how his grandma, for example, said some racist things, but she was a kind person, and it would be cruel to call a harmless old lady racist, and would only make her more racist. It seemed far more important to him that the white people who were spreading and upholding racism be spared the effects of being called racist than sparing his black friend the effects of that racism. No matter what I said, no matter how I described the effects of this sort of racism had on me and other people of color, he was not going to accept me using the word racist to describe it. That was when I learned that this was not a friend I could talk to about the really important part of my life. I couldn't be my full self around him, and he would never truly have my back. He was not safe. I wasn't angry. I was heartbroken. We couldn't talk about the ways in which race and racism impacted my life because he was unwilling to even acknowledge the racism that was impacting my life, and he was unable to prioritize my safety over his comfort, which meant that we couldn't talk about me.
Thank you, Ijeoma. Ijeoma, would you briefly explain what makes your book different? I mean, you go out there, you'll see tons and tons of books on race. What's different about this book?
So I wanted to write a book that was less of like an academic exploration of race. I feel like that has been done quite well and continues to be done quite well by a lot of academics who've dedicated entire lifetimes of study to these terms. Oftentimes those books are very important in laying the foundation for other work that's done on race, especially organizationally. But I wanted to write a book for everyday use, a book for people who want to know what race and racism looks like day to day, or people who do know what it looks like and want to know how to have better conversations about it every day. If you want to know how you can make a difference in your office, if you want to know how you can better communicate with your neighbors, if you want to know what opportunities there are in your school system. I also wanted to make it so that people who are hearing all of these terms, we are talking about Black Lives Mattering, we are talking about the school to prison pipeline, feel more comfortable engaging in this conversation to understand this issue better, to become better allies, to become better partners, or to advocate better for yourself and your family and your community. And I couldn't find a book that was really here's your day-to-day handbook that will help you have a better chance of success in the conversations that help you come up with opportunities to make change in the systems that you actually deal with day in and day out. I wanted something that was kind of more personally empowering and educating for everyone, even if you never intended to, get your degree in African American studies, so that when you are out in the world, you have a tool to make you better informed and to help you deconstruct the systems of white supremacy where you interact with them.
And that's what I loved. I just finished reading the book, and that's what I loved most about it, because it's part her memoirs and part it's like a tool book. It's a handbook, it's a manual, what to do. And not only when you're white, also when you're black, or not white, not black, some other color. So it's a very good tool book for all of us, actually. Let's bring Daisy in our discussion right now. Daisy is named one of the 10 Muslim women every person should know by the Huffington Post, and one of Times Magazine's 100 most influential people in America. Daisy, in her book Born with Wings, tells the story of her spiritual journey and how she used faith to overcome the adversity for herself and those around her. Daisy was born in Kashmir, moved to Long Island, and worked as an architect in New York City, finding herself at the center of the community, Muslim community, from which she actually had walked away from when she came to America. Born and raised in a very religious family, moving away from religion when she came to America, and eventually ended up marrying the imam of an Islamic center and mosque, and leading the struggle for women empowerment across the globe. That's quite a journey. So Daisy, welcome to the panel, and please read for us.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here today. And like it was mentioned, I am a Muslim, I am a woman, I am an immigrant, and I am a naturalized citizen of this beautiful nation called America. And for the last 20 years or so, there is this negative perception about my faith that has taken root in America, whether it has to do with linking Islam to terrorism or whether it has to do with women's issues, where you see the subjugation of women or women's noses being cut off or they're being honor killed and child marriages and all these issues that you see in the press. And I have, tried very hard to work on these issues, but I want you to know how that happened, what was the evolution of how I actually, where I got my fight from, and why I think that today, hopefully after you leave this beautiful auditorium, that you will leave with a very different impression of who Muslims are, and particularly Muslim women, when given a seat at the table. So I will be doing a little reading about where I got my seat at the table. I'm about 3 years old, and my father is teaching me how to box in the front lawn of our house in the shadow of the Himalayas. Yesterday, I ran home crying that I had been bullied by a bigger child. Now I'm attending barefoot in boys' shorts as Papaji. I call him Papaji because that's how we refer to it's dear Papa. Approaches me with a big smile, dangling a pair of shiny red gloves. Boxing gloves with white laces. The gloves are almost as big as I am. He puts them on me and shows me how to punch. Left, right, jump up, jump back, duck, lean into it. If anyone tries to bully you, stand up for yourself, and if necessary, punch them in the nose. He instructs as he pretends to be felled by my wobbly left hook. My mother is scandalized at the idea of her daughter fighting or even fighting back. In Kashmir, girls do not pack punches. But Papaji says to her, I'll turn her into a tomboy. She will always be a girl, but I can still have the boy I want. I want to make my Papaji proud. I struggle to put the gloves on and throw dutiful practice punches. I treasure the gloves because they mean my father has confidence in me, and I keep them in a place of pride in my room. The thought of having a real fight and using the gloves as they were intended never occurs to me. But even as a very young girl, I know that the gloves are speaking to me. You are one thing, they say, but you have the potential to be something else. You need to be somebody else. Would throwing punches that please my Papaji be the thing that could turn me into greater, more powerful me? Or into somebody else entirely? I peer into the mirror. A small, brown-haired girl looks back. And then there is my mother, who frowns in her gentle way every time I put on the gloves. And I do put on the gloves. Yes, Papaji. I wear them when I come to America to pursue my education. I wear them when I move out of the womb of my uncle's home to start my career. I wear them when I write a protest letter at the age of 21 to Newsday from my college campus. I wear them when I refused an arranged marriage to a prince and marry an imam instead. You know the equation. One is rich, one is poor. I wear them when I feel the burden of what it means to be a Muslim woman. I wear them when I challenge leaders who define my faith with their archaic attitudes. I wear them when I help convince an old woman to stop cutting a little girl on a filthy table and bring a new light into her life. I wear them when I unite Muslim women to take back rights that have been stripped away from them over the centuries. I wear them to convince imams to issue a fatwa against child marriage. I wear them to honor my faith. And finally, I wear them to fight the extremists among members of my own faith. In fact, since that day in the yard in Kashmir, I have never really taken off the red boxing gloves. I have quietly passed them along to my sisters around the world. We are here. Now we must reach there. This book is about that journey.
Daisy, your book was released 2 days ago, I believe, in New York. And it's a very important chapter in the story of America right now. And most of the stories that you share in the book, which I've been reading, they're relevant to what's happening in the current political environment. So share us a little bit about their relevance.
First of all, as Sophia mentioned, I never imagined that I would be standing here speaking to all of you about my religion, my faith. I had a career, an architectural career for 25 years, which I had to give up because the need was so great in my community for me to step up to the plate and do the work that I needed to do to help my community. And I never imagined that my story, the story of this one woman, a little girl who grew up in a distant land, came to America to pursue an education, and then, by circumstances of 9/11, wound up quitting her career, marrying an imam, getting involved in community affairs, would one day be speaking about some of the most pressing issues that are happening in America right now. There is conversations about immigration going on, or these are the foundational values of America that are under threat. Immigration. I'm an immigrant. I am a success story, and there are many immigrants like me all over America contributing to the social fabric of America. I am a product of chain migration, which is under threat, which also means family unification. Everybody has the right to be with their brother, their grandmother, their sister, their cousin, especially at times like, vacation, family events like Thanksgiving. That is under threat right now. My uncle brought me to the United States at the age, at a tender age, took care of me for 9 years. And I'm a product of chain migration. And so are many other immigrants. Then there is racism, which my colleague spoke about. that has quickly morphed into something called Islamophobia. It's the same pernicious disease. I do not see myself in you. You are different. I'm superior, you're inferior. It just moves from one person to another group to another group. And it's a continual challenge, and we need to shift the discourse on that. Then there is the war on terror. Why have we not succeeded with war on terror? We've spent billions of dollars with bombs, with sanctions, with drones, and the groups just get killed in one place and they morph in another place and they just continue on. Why have we not succeeded with that? And what do we do in America? Instead of engaging the community, we isolate that community. And we single out an entire group because of actions of a few. That too is un-American, and it's wrong. And then there are numerous other conversations going on in this country that, immigration, chain migration, racism, Islamophobia, war on terror, religious freedom. Some of you heard in 2010, there was a conversation about a community center that was proposed in Lower Manhattan. You remember that big national news? Guess who was behind that? Me. It was my husband and I. And I had to take out these boxing gloves to define myself at that time. Because you know what they were saying? Your religion is not truly an American religion. And oh, by the way, not you, not now, not here. And I stood my ground. And I had to take the boxing gloves. Not for me, for the freedoms that we have cherished from the very beginning. This is a foundational value of America. Religious freedom is sacrosanct to America. And so I never imagined that I would be writing this book with interweaving all these issues into my book. I never imagined that. But it turns out that that's what's happened. So this is not only my experience, this is the experience of many of my Muslim colleagues. I just happen to have written a book that comes at a time when these conversations are going on.
It's very relevant indeed. I came to America 24 years ago, and I had no clue what racism is because I came from a culture which was 99.9% people like me living together. So I came to America, and all of a sudden I see a lens which sees only black and white. Now, Daisy, you are neither black nor white. Where do you fit in there? And I think I invite both of you to take that question about the racial lens of America, which is either black or white mostly. So where do you fit in? And Ijeoma, what do you have to say about that?
The other day, I was in New York at an event where there was a conversation going on about feminism. And so there were two people on stage. One was Helen Kelly Hunt, a white woman who was talking about the suffragists who had fought the big fight in America, collectively, white and black women together. And then there was Rachel Fisher, and she was talking about new wave feminism, about bringing the diversity to feminism, the racial diversity, that element that's been missing in feminism. And there was a woman in the audience, about 80 years old, and she was very angered, and she was Japanese American. And she said, the two of you are on stage talking about black and white, black and white, black and white. What about the yellow, the brown, and the red? We should all be part of this conversation. Because America is also a nation of immigrants, and we all are here. But our voices get drowned out, and we are not, somehow this nation is divided along the lines of black and white. And I think we need to broaden this conversation to a bigger lens. In my spiritual journey, when I was confronted with who I was, I actually discovered that I was so many things. Because my struggle with myself was I was beginning to feel this fragmentation. Am I American? Am I Muslim? Am I brown? Am I Indian? What am I? It's almost like I had to choose sides with who I am. My identity formation was in crisis. And I delved into my scripture and I discovered a very beautiful concept in there, and that is that I am actually primarily a breath of the divine, a spark of the divine that is in me, the physical body, and I embody that. And by the way, guess what? All 6 billion of us have that. And that's what unites us, and that's where we get our equality from. And this is why all the scriptures say you are equal in the eyes of God. So I do not see you as a black person, as a yellow person, as a white person. I see you primarily as a spark of the divine. And that's where we get our dignity from.
Would you like to say something, Ijeoma?
Yeah, I think that it's important that we recognize when we look at the history of this country, that this country was built on the extermination of one people and the enslavement of another. These are the two greatest injustices of this nation that hold up every institution that we have. So when we talk about race and we talk about white supremacy, what we're talking about is the fabric of this nation. And it's important to recognize that white supremacy is a kind of a club of exclusion. You are in white supremacy, and then there are levels with which you deviate from it. And you will be persecuted in different ways depending on where you deviate. I think it's always important to look at what those individual treatments look like, which is why I say it's incredibly important that people do see me as a black woman. That's my history, it's my culture. It's also, if you are ever going to help me and combat the systems that are oppressing me, then the specific anti-blackness that infuses Western culture is important to be looked at for what it is. Just as it's important to look at the brutality, the erasure, and the genocide against indigenous peoples and the continued efforts to erase them. And it's important to look at the incredible harm done by the model minority myth and look at the way in which this harms Asian Americans, right? These are all things that we need to look at, but we need to look at them specifically because of how they interact with our systems. Also because we have built culture from this, right? Black culture, the culture that I love and identify with, was pulled together and built through immense brutality. And it is special and beautiful and wonderful in mine, and you have to actually see me as a black woman in order to see that. I think that it is really important that we recognize that white supremacy is the oppressor that we are all fighting. And it takes many forms in how it chooses to oppress people. And white supremacy will oppress Muslim Americans in one way, it will oppress Jewish people in one way, it will oppress black people in one way. We have to look at it all and know that we have a common oppressor, that we can come together and support each other and build community and, find common ground with. But it's also important that we not allow ourselves to be erased in that process. So a lot of times I hear people do get very frustrated when the discussion on race is black and white, black and white, black and white. Part of the reason why we talk about this discussion in black and white is just simply because some of the worst horrors and brutalities of what white supremacy looks like in this country have been reserved for black Americans. And the other population that it was reserved for has been erased. Indigenous people exist, but they've been erased from our cultural narrative. A lot of children think there are no more indigenous people here.
Absolutely.
And when we talk about country, we talk about the founding of this nation, we like to forget that we're all on stolen land. And so the two stories of the biggest brutality, when we look at it, of course, because we are still living, because Black Americans are still treated the way they are because we were brought over as slaves, because we were seen as property, because the entire economic system was built on our exploitation, it ends up being a focal point. But it is also a tool of white supremacy to make sure that we don't see other oppressions, so that we can't find commonalities, so that we can't see and say, I'm going to stand with my Chinese American brothers and sisters, or my Latinx brothers and sisters, because we all are fighting white supremacy, and that's a tool of it as well. And so we have to kind of find balance. That frustration is real, and I think that we definitely need to broaden these conversations and reach out, but we must do so while still preserving our identity and preserving the discussion that's pertinent to the specific ways in which we are all being harmed by white supremacy in America.
I'd like to add, Sophia, I'd like to...
Okay. Go ahead.
So beautifully said. I do want to add a very important aspect of this that I learned, that I discovered, that's very important. This was supported and justified by the churches. Slavery was justified and supported for hundreds of years. No one spoke about it. And it was justified because as I have doing study of my own scripture to see how we violate and weaponize scripture, I also asked this question of my fellow Christians, really beautiful Christians. How did you guys, why were you quiet for a couple of hundred years? What were you doing? You asked me, where are the Muslims and why don't they speak out? Why weren't you speaking out? Weren't you good Christians? And then I discovered there was actually something they had taken from the Bible, which they were justifying that these people were heathens and they needed to be saved, and that is why they were bringing them to America.
Yes.
And that is why they were being enslaved. And that is why their religions were being changed. So we have to understand that this crime was happening and the churches were remaining silent. It's only when these devout suffragists who were religious women said, wait, something is wrong. We should not do this in the name of our Bible. That moral authority was raised to a whole new consciousness. So I think we need to really talk about it, also from the perspective of how powerful religions can be in instituting something that is fundamentally evil.
Absolutely, and even though realizing that systemic racism existed and still exists, it's still difficult to talk about it. And I have seen that challenge within myself, with people around me, the fear that what if I talk about race wrong? And that's a chapter in Ijeoma's book, and I want you to briefly comment on it, because why do we still have that fear? Why talking about race is still a challenge? And what solutions do you propose in that chapter? That's my favorite chapter in the book, by the way.
I really wanted to include this because part of the reason why I wrote the book was I wanted to update our conversations on race. We only talk about race oftentimes, or racism. We see it as you are a KKK member or you are an anti-racist. And that's it. And we talk about racism as if the only brutality visited upon Black people in this country were lynchings and cross burnings. But the truth is even in the post-Reconstruction South, the horror that you faced day in and day out was whether or not you were going to be able to feed your family or educate your children. And the same, many of this, whether you could be protected by police, the same things that we fear today. These are systems. And we had armed wings of the systems that would occasionally visit great horror upon the population. But it's the everyday mundane horror that is, causing Black mothers to have 4 times the death rate in childbirth as white mothers. It's the everyday horror that is locking up 1 in 3 Black men. It's the everyday horror that is sending 4 times as many Black preschoolers to, out of school with suspensions than white preschoolers, right? These are the sorts of things that are everyday systems that we interact with. And what happens is because we only talk about race as people with hate in their hearts, people who are intending to go out and ruin the lives of people of color, and then everyone else are good people. When we start to talk about race, and it goes wrong, and you realize you might have done something racially insensitive, you suddenly feel like you have turned into, or you've been labeled as, that great racist, that great Klan member. You're an irredeemable person. And our defenses shoot up. And we are so afraid that that's what's going to happen in this conversation that people shut down. And it becomes then more important that you're not seen as racist than that you are actually doing something to mitigate the harm of racism for people of color. And so a lot of people are afraid, and I hear so often from people saying, well, I start talking about this and I say the wrong thing, and then someone's calling me racist, and and I can't have this conversation anymore. And that's a really common reaction, but there are some fundamental problems with that reaction. One, racial oppression does not care about your intentions. Racial oppression is an outcome. And it's an outcome based on this system that really, day in and day out, requires us to do nothing for it to continue. If we continue to interact with our economic system, our education system, the way it's been built, we are encouraging racial oppression because it was built into the systems. And it does not matter whether you intended to or not. And so if someone's coming to you and saying, this harms me, saying I didn't mean to doesn't actually remove the harm. The harm is a definite thing. And we have to first realize that because it's filled with all of our systems, it is easier to be racist. It is easier to support racist systems than not. And that means more than likely, you're going to say some things that are questionable in these conversations. You're going to make some wrong moves. And you're going to probably be called out, or someone is at least going to tell you that you've harmed them. And we're going to have to sit with that and recognize, okay, I have harmed someone. And deal with that pain. Realize it doesn't completely rewrite who you are as a person, but it doesn't absolve you from responsibility. What I tried to do with this chapter is to help people avoid being overrun by those defensive reactions that pop up, and to kind of give you a better chance of not running into that situation in the first place. So knowing what you're talking about before you sit down, knowing what your goal is for conversations on race. A lot of times what happens with these conversations is a white person and a person of color will start talking about a racial issue. But the person of color, their objective, right, is to get someone maybe to understand what they need to feel more safe. But the white person, their objective is to get this person of color to realize that they're not racist and they're a good person. Those are two very different goals.
Yep.
And you're having two very different conversations. And as you're constantly saying, no, see me, see that I'm not racist, see that I'm not racist, the person of color feels more and more erased and invalidated. And the fact that, they aren't even being considered, and their humanity and their feelings aren't being considered in this thing that's painful for them, reinforces white supremacy. And before you know it, you've got this conversation that's dissolved, that's blown up, and you don't know what went wrong. And so a lot of times right now what I see are people, especially white people in these conversations, trying really hard to avoid pain. And what I need people to understand is that I don't know a single person of color who comes to a discussion of race without pain. And who isn't taking a huge amount of risk. And this means that you need to take some risk. And it means that if in the conversation it turns out you don't look as clean and rosy as you thought you did, that's a pain you need to sit with. Because the ultimate goal is not that you come out knowing that you were just as fantastic as you thought you were, but that you find out what you can do better and how you can be a part of the solution. So I really wanted to give some kind of clear steps to get people out of that crisis mode when they feel hit and stung. Yes. And also to support people of color when they're in these conversations and the person they're talking to feels hit and stung, because it can be very easy then to be convinced that you're the problem, that you were too angry, or that you were too forward, or that you shouldn't have brought it up in the first place, and to kind of reinforce that we have the right to discuss the ways in which we're being harmed. And we have the right to bring it to the people who are harming us. And just because someone is not ready to hear it doesn't mean that we don't have the right to say it.
Thank you. Perfect. Let's take a few questions from the audience before we close the session. So raise your hand if you have any question. Yes, ma'am. Right here. We have a mic coming to you right now, so give me a... Yes.
You stated you wanted to write a book about everyday racism. So perhaps Starbucks will buy all of its employees a copy of your book. All right. How is it that they closed 8,000 stores to train their employees of how to treat other people with humanity? How absurd. For me?
I had a lot of requests for comment on the Starbucks. I mean, my inbox was filled, right? Suddenly, it's like people just discovered that there was racial discrimination in public spaces. And it was funny because a lot of people were talking about it as if it was a Starbucks problem, as if I was going to start going to Tully's and get treated like a Queen of Sheba, That wasn't going to happen. I think it's important, a couple of things that struck me about the Starbucks thing. First off, a lot of people were saying, we need to get you in the Starbucks. I had been in Starbucks 2 weeks earlier at Starbucks headquarters. I live in Seattle. Right. Reading from my book. This is not an issue that a 2-hour session, closing all your stores for 2 hours, is going to solve.
2 hours, huh?
Yeah, it's not going to fix it. I think it's really important that we realize that we have a culture that says that Black people and people of color are less than, and that they are inconveniences, and that you have the right to react violently to a person of color making you uncomfortable or inconveniencing your day. And that is white supremacy in itself, the thought that you are so superior that the presence of two black men is worth calling the police over. But I think it's also important to realize that our businesses do not treat black people like customers. And even in the initial response to what's happened at Starbucks and a lot of Starbucks philanthropy that they do, right? Someone was telling me, oh, but Starbucks is building coffee shops in all black neighborhoods and hiring black people. Well, they should, because black people drink coffee. And the thought that we would be a charity project and not a customer, right? The thought that you wouldn't, because fundamentally what happened at Starbucks was an issue that Starbucks, like many companies, does not see a black population as a population they want to court as customers. Because you build policies around that, that's where your money is, right? When you want them coming in and being so comfortable, they tell their friends and they have their meetings there, and they actually do what these two black men were doing, which was sitting in a Starbucks to have a meeting with other people, right? You want that, which means that you train to make sure they're comfortable. It's any retailer's worst nightmare to send a valued customer away unhappy to tell their friends that they had a horrible time. But when you can get away with time and time again treating black people a certain way, that means you didn't build into your profit model black dollars, right? You thought these were people you wanted to keep away. These were not customers you wanted to send home delighted. And that's because we don't think of black people and a lot of other people of color as whole people who have money and goals and want to have meetings and want to drink coffee. And I think that that's fundamentally what we need to look at. A lot of times what happens when these sort of racist things happen in businesses is then we look at what do we need to do to reach out to our black friends? No, what do you need to do to serve your black customers? And we need to be seen as customers. We are not a project. We are a part of the community. And I really hope that we see this. The problem that happened in Starbucks, and that's happened in Cracker Barrel, and that's happened basically everywhere else you go, is the fact that when someone builds a business and they think of a customer, they do not think of black people. Just like, when people make a film and you can build a whole fantasy world, and black people don't exist in it. It's because we have a society that doesn't see us as full-fledged human beings and, participants in this world and in this economy. And that's fundamentally what needs to change.
I want you to turn to page 120 of your book.
Yes, ma'am.
And I want to say to the universe, thank you, my goddess mother, for not indoctrinating me to become a Christian. Okay. So there's a young female activist in Little Rock, and I approached her the other day and I apologized that she now has to inherit this generational after generation of this oppression. And you wrote, and their children are inheriting that same disadvantage. That page propelled me from my seat because it's generational. And where is our humanity? I mean, where is it? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there another question in the audience? Right there, ma'am, on your left.
I enjoyed this panel quite a bit. My question is about, a coworker and I were talking, he's black, and we were talking about, this was before the Kanye stuff, why black people can't have diverse thoughts, like when it comes to like politics and stuff like that. And I was trying to put it into words like, when it's problematic and uphold white supremacy, that's when it's a problem. So could you somehow, both of you even, like if like someone in the black community or Muslim community, why is it a problem when they advocate for someone like President Trump, other than just being a Republican? It's not about difference of opinion. I just want to put into words like why that is not good. other than just, because they're not free thinkers, they're going against the grain, like just why that's a problem and why, how can I respond to someone who asks me that?
Yeah, I think, so one of the problems I see, first and foremost, is a lack of representation. We don't have enough high-profile black people to have them pulling a Kanye, and then we lose 1/10 of the black male representation on a national stage, right? Part of that is simply, there are plenty of white people who get to act a fool all day long, and it doesn't change the way in which people see white people. And that's a fundamental issue that needs to be addressed, while at the same time we also need to reach out with love and understand that white supremacy is something that's taught in our schools. It's taught in all of our systems. And the damage that it does to us is real. And some people get caught in that and will internalize anti-blackness in ways they did not know. Or will try to make deals. I've seen a lot of, I love Kanye as a black man and as a very talented musician. But I've seen even in his music the ways in which it seems that he has defined success in the ability for a black man to turn into a white man, and that to me has never been success or liberation. And that will have you supporting people like Trump. And it does not mean that he's coming up with this out of thin air. This is the dialogue of our country. This is what it's telling people, right? And this is in every aspect of our system. Even in education, we talk about why aren't black kids getting better test scores, but do we really want them acing white supremacy? Right? That's a conversation that we need to be having as well. And so I think that in community, we need to reach out and support people, even our people who may be lost, and talk fundamentally about what they're saying and say, do you understand, what you are saying about fellow black people? Or do you understand what Trump actually stands for? Not just the inflammatory rhetoric, but the people he's appointing to cabinet. And the impact this will have on black lives and brown lives and so many other people, trans people, disabled people. Do you understand what it is you're signing up for? Do you understand that deal you're making because you think it might get you a little more power? Do you want to be an oppressor? Is that what liberation looks like to you? And I think that we need to always be aware. All of our movements, we have the real danger of becoming oppressors in our own right when we start to define success by looking like our oppressors or having the freedom to harm the way our oppressors do. And we don't want that. We also, though, have to be protective of our own. I firmly believe this. So I don't like seeing white people with their sunken place memes talking about Kanye. That's not for them. There are enough black people to come and collect our own, and we must with love. And then white people keep working on white supremacy. You got a lot of people to collect on your own. But I think that I think a lot of times keeping that, understanding that, of course, we have just as much freedom to a variety of opinions. And just like I have met plenty of white women with fiercely anti-feminist views, and I scratch my head. That's their right. And I think that as a feminist, your goal isn't necessarily to, browbeat anti-feminist women into believing in feminism. It's to go where the power is and deconstruct that power. And that's where the same thing I feel like, when we have our lost brothers and sisters, we try to talk to them with love, maybe say a prayer if you believe in that, and then you just keep fighting white supremacy. And eventually that will give, I think, almost anyone the freedom to see the system as it is. There's so much dialogue that wants us to not see it, that wants us to be out there talking like Kanye right now. And it takes a lot of strength to fight that. And so for me, a lot of times, instead of fighting my own, I'm going to fight to give the freedom that you don't have to necessarily be that strong all the time. So that you can be open, and when something hits you and it hurts, you can say it hurts and it will be recognized, instead of people telling you, no, it's something different, and then next thing you know, you're at a Trump rally. And so, that's kind of where I'm at for that. I try to talk to people with love, and then I just focus on who has the power in the system. I focus on where the problem is, and know that in the end, it will pick them up and free them when the system is gone.
Daisy, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So people think that Muslims are also monolith. They think that we are like one body. We speak with one voice, and we have the same opinions. But many people don't realize that majority of Muslims who are immigrants are very entrepreneurial people. So they tend to vote Republican. And when George Bush was elected, a lot of Muslims voted for George Bush. And because they were Republicans, they're fiscally conservative and also socially conservative. So they tend to lean towards, Republican values in those two areas. And your pocketbook is the most important thing to you. Most people vote their pocketbook at the end of the day. But that has changed. That has shifted radically over time because of the wars that we have been fighting, the policies of the neocons that really, created a shift in the mindsets of Muslims here. And now, over time, they have tended to vote Democratic. Even my own brother, he used to vote Republican, and he was pondering whether he should vote for Donald Trump. And of course, we all ganged up on him and made sure that he didn't, and made sure we steered him in this way. I don't know what he actually did when he pressed the button, but I don't think he voted. This is our reality, and I think that people are now voting their values more than they are voting their pocketbook.
Thank you, Daisy. We're almost at the end of the session, so I would briefly like both of you to comment that 50 years after the civil rights movement, we are still learning how to talk about race. Do you see the same future for faith in America? Have we learned from past? Where is hope? Is there hope?
I would say it's important to recognize too, and a lot of times when I say this online, I get like white trolls like to correct me on this, but Islamophobia is inherently racist. And part of the reason why it exists is because it's predominantly brown people who are Muslim. And anti-Semitism as well. What you see are white supremacist groups revoking whiteness and saying, no, it's us now. And I think that we have to understand that all of this lives and dies with the battle against white supremacy. And if we look at the numbers and statistics, white supremacy has been barely budged in 50 years because we haven't focused on systems, we haven't been able to. And it's not necessarily, I'd say, because activists haven't been trying. We had, an entire generation of black and brown activists locked away in prison. And it's, in some ways, we're starting from scratch. But I think it's important that we recognize that our fates are always going to be tied, which is why, I will never condone religious discrimination. And I'm an atheist. So I look with bewilderment upon every religion I encounter. But I don't condone religious discrimination too, because I also know that discrimination, while people will say it's not about race, it's about faith, it's not. And a lot of what people are saying, which is part of the reason why, a Sikh can be, misinterpreted as a Muslim, and that's appearance only, and, be treated with extreme hatred. And these are the sorts of things that we have to understand. This is all white supremacy at work. And so that battle continues. I do see our younger generations better able to make that connection and see. And I think it's also important to realize, too, that even within these battles, racism lives. So when we talk about Islamophobia, a lot of times people forget how many black Muslims there are and how they're at the crux of both extreme anti-blackness and Islamophobia, or how many black Jews there are and how they're being treated by everyone else. And we have to recognize that together, we really do all have a common a common oppressor in white supremacy. And it incorporates Christian values, but it doesn't need it. I see just as much white supremacy in atheist circles as I see in Christian circles. And the way in which they choose to target religions often is race-based as well. And so I think that our fates are tied together, and that we have to recognize that and continue to stand up wherever we see this oppression. And even if it doesn't feel like it's impacting you immediately, know that anywhere you let it stand, you are going to let it impact you, because it will come back around to you sooner or later.
Thank you. Daisy?
So I think the more we share our stories, the more we open ourselves to the other, the more respect can even flow between us. Once we see ourselves in the faces of others, we can stand side by side on the basis of our human identity. As Westerners or Easterners, as religious or not, as black, white, yellow, or brown, with layers of identity nested within a larger sense of identity, out of many, one in a single space. And I, as a Muslim woman, see the future of faith. if for too long we women in this moment of we too were not permitted at the table, we are now creating our own table. It is a long table of love, not a tall fence of hate. And as a designer, I embrace the blueprint. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. Daisy and Ijeoma both will be headed towards the book signing table, which is right in the back of this room. If you would like to meet with them personally or talk to them, that's where you need to be. Thank you so much for coming again. We have wonderful sessions going on. We hope you will stay and enjoy more of the Literary Fest. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Before we go.